Of all of the fields of medicine, dermatology is the second whitest field, meaning that it's like 97% of all dermatologists are white. Here's a study. It's the Kruger study. Finds discrepancies in biopsy decisions, diagnoses based on skin type. And basically what it is that, they gave random sample of dermatologists photos of melanomas for people with dark skin, brown skin, and white skin. And they said, hey, diagnose this. What is it? And which ones would you send up for biopsies? And what they found was that they did a really nice job for people with light skin. They picked out the ones that were in fact cancerous and said, yep, we need a biopsy. This one turns out, yep, they were right much of the time. That turned out to be cancerous. But for people with more darkly pigmented skin, it's like they missed it. They sent the wrong things to get biopsied. They were much more likely to send things up to get biopsied that were not cancerous. And the things that were cancerous, they missed them. So you missed. So meaning that even if you go to the dermatologist, so when you do go, so this is part of the survival rate. So it is that there's a distrust and you don't go in time. But there's also that when you do go, the dermatology field, the dermatologist is much more likely to be white. It's like they miss it. They're not skilled. They don't see your skin. They're just going to be less likely to find things on your skin than my skin. And the things they find, they're going to miss. They're going to send things up for biopsy that are not cancerous, and they're going to miss the ones that are. And part of this is training in textbooks. That for years and years and years, now I'm moving in, this is where the two of you now come into play more so. Now I'm moving into the system argument. This is what I walked away from the conversation with my dermatologist thinking. The field of dermatologists needs to change. So right now I just said to black and brown people, y'all need to change a little bit. Okay, you need to rethink some of this. But now I'm going to talk about the field of dermatology. Okay, so training in textbooks. I asked him, like, where'd you get, just similar to the phlebotomist, where'd you get trained to look at dark skin? He said, well, to be honest with you, in the textbooks, when I was going through dermatology school, I rarely saw photos of dark skin. He said, you know what? In fact, the place where people with dark skin, black people are overrepresented in dermatology textbooks, in his experience, is with STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. Oh, so we want to show syphilis, or we want to show gonorrhea, or we want to show, here's a photo of a black person. So he said, if you want me to identify sexually transmitted diseases among a black or a brown person, he said, I'm really good at that because I saw lots and lots of photos. But I didn't see photos of other things. And I think, okay, here's the system. Here's the system. This is the privilege that Nat was talking about, right? If white people are in charge, if you're not thinking that we have a problem, then you're not gonna think about it. You're not gonna move on it. You're not gonna do anything about it. So it's like men in here. When you walk across campus at night, and you just walk across campus by yourself. You're meandering around, you're going to wherever you're going, you're not looking around to make sure you're safe, you're nothing. But I walk across campus at night, and I see some woman by herself, and 9 times out of 10, this is what I see. Or on speakerphone or somewhere. Why? She may not even be talking to somebody. But she looks like she's talking to somebody because she's thinking about everything that's going around. And in my so-called male privilege, I don't have to think about that. So if I don't have a woman in my life, if I didn't have women students telling me, oh yeah, this is how we roll across campus, man, with my phone. I'm always talking to somebody in case something happens, like I want to already be on the phone with somebody. So okay, makes sense, right? That's male privilege. In a way. I mean, I don't see it. Why would I see it? So I'm not responsible for seeing that. Why would I think about that? If I didn't observe it and then go like, why is every woman on a phone? But I'm not inherently responsible for that, for knowing that, because I can't be responsible for knowing everything. Okay? So we can't blame folks. But in this case, at some point in time, white people, this white system, training all these dermatologists, you got to say, what about all these black and brown people? Why weren't you thinking about race? And you say, well, because, this is me, because we didn't think about race in the same way in the 70s and 80s. It's like really the past 20 years or so that we're really putting this out in a new way, okay? So here, let me show you some photos. Go to the next. So this is COVID toe. And that's actually somebody from Southeast Asia on the left. But if you saw that as a dermatologist and didn't know, COVID toe on the right with a white person is really red. So that means, somebody who has COVID and it kind of shows up with this on your toes in some really odd way. Well, that's easy. But if you didn't ever see it on the left, you wouldn't say, oh, that's COVID toe. If you were only used to the pink, right to the one. So, okay. Next one. This is a rash, a bullseye rash from Lyme disease. Well, look at the rash on the left. You have to know what that rash is. Like you have to look for that. That's got to be in a text. You got to have to talk about that so hey, when a darker skinned person gets Lyme disease, the rash is not going to be a bullseye. But always, what do we hear again and again and again? Do you hear about Lyme disease?
Yeah.
What do you look for the bullseye, right?
Yeah.
Do you see a bullseye on the left?
No, but there is discoloration.
There's discoloration, but it's not a bullseye.
But it's still something that should be looked at and
should be looked
tested.
At. But would the first thing, if you were a dermatologist, would the first thing you thought, if you didn't know anything about that, would you think, oh, Lyme disease?
No, but I'm also not a doctor, so.
Yeah, I got you. But if you didn't do the research and know, you might just move on.
I think that's the issue, is that there's a lack of research for
exactly.
people of color and knowing how to treat them and knowing what to look for. So instead of just looking for how do I identify Lyme disease within a white individual, you would have to look at how do I identify Lyme disease for a colored individual.
Exactly, for someone of color. Yep. Go to the next one. Here's melanoma. So, if you have darker skin, you're much more likely to get a melanoma. It's called an ALM. And you're going to get it on the bottoms of your feet or under your fingernails, somewhere that's not obvious. So it doesn't necessarily come from the sun. You're much more likely to. So it's like, oh, you got to know that. You got to look at those things. You got to look underneath people's fingernails. I'd want to say, hey, let me look at your fingernails. I wouldn't say that to you, right? But if I know that, then I do. And so here's where the field of dermatology is catching up with this new conversation. And so when you hear, can we go to the very first, don't go to the slide, but the slide is like, when should we see color? It sounds to me like we should start seeing color right now in the field of dermatology, right? Go to the next one. So practitioners. So I asked my dermatologist, I said, hey, so what are things do you really have to do with people? He said, well, one, for example, I have to, he was looking through my hair and he's looking for skin cancer on my head because a couple times in particular, when I was a kid, I got sunburn really bad on my head. So I'm always saying, hey, check my scalp. So he's got his hands, going through my scalp very carefully, right? And I said, well, do you do that with black people? And he said, well, I do. I try to because I understand how important it is. But you go to the dermatologist and the person says, hey, I got to sort through those extensions, man. And I got to really dig around in your hair. And, maybe there are a lot of dermatologists who are not comfortable with that. And they're going to, and all they hear are the stories about, man, black people in their hair, black women in their hair. It's and they're just not going to do that. And I'm like, hey, but he's saying, nah, but I bust through that because I know I have to because people get skin cancer on the top of their heads. Like, okay, that's this person's willingness to say, I'm going all in. Like I'm gonna do this. But a lot of people wouldn't. And they wouldn't have the experience. Maybe you're in a community where there aren't a lot of black and brown people. So like, dude, it'd be tough to go through your hair, man. You're like definitely got a lot of hair there. And for me, it's pretty easy. You could look at like you can just see like you don't even have to go through it.
I have to get a haircut.
Yeah, but no, it's not. But it's thick, man. So, but it's also would be a willingness to learn. The profession of dermatology, all the way at the top, the way training is done in medical schools, the textbooks, the research, the way dermatologists are trained to interact with patients from top to bottom. It seems to me that it's very important that this whole field of dermatology catches up, because it's been unfair to people with black and brown skin. And so for me, if I go back, can you go to the very first slide, Leah? If I go back to the question of today, when should we see color? Whereas sometimes, like people will say, oh, we're talking about color too much. I feel like this is one area where we should see color. And so when I hear people say, hey, it's about race or it's about color, we need to talk about this. This is one area where I think it's fair. Final thoughts, and then we're going to do the final quiz.
I mean, I totally agree with you. Where like dermatology is something that you should look for, like you should look at color, because you need to recognize that that's something where if you look at a white individual versus a colored individual, you're going to have to treat them differently. You can't assume everyone's the same in that sense. Yeah. So for those of you who are like in the medical field right now, I would say like advocate for those who are colored and ask your professors.
And by colored, you mean like all in all backgrounds, like all shades, all backgrounds.
Anyone.
When we say when I say, to be clear, if I say black people, I'm really talking people of sub-Saharan African ancestry. If I say brown people, I'm talking about kind of everybody else who's not white, and sometimes including mixed people. But
I would say like advocate for those people and push your professors to teach more about that, so that way when you're in the profession in the future, you can help individuals who are colored and give them the same experience.
Colored is the wrong term.
Yeah, say of color. Yeah, say of color. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was nice. Just getting to know different perspectives.
Yeah.
I never knew that this was a thing, so I learned a lot of new things. But also the fact that we looked at it from every perspective. So as a patient, my responsibility is to trust my doctor and whoever. And sure, there have been things like the syphilis thing you talked about. There have been things in the past, but for you to move forward as society, you have to take that step. But at the same time, the doctors also need to study. Like there's so much that everyone needs to